All right, well, thanks so much, everybody, for taking time out of your day to join our information session about a new research communication competition that we're implementing for spring 2022, Empower Your Pitch. I'm really excited for your interest in this program and excited to share more information about it. My name is Christine Kelly. I'm the Associate Director of the PHutures Career Office here at Johns Hopkins. In terms of our plan for today, I have, if my slides will cooperate here, okay, have a brief agenda for you all. And I'm also going to be intentional about taking some time to pause throughout the session to collect any questions from you or to hear any thoughts that you might have to share as you're learning more about this opportunity and considering participating in both the competition itself and also a research communication series that runs parallel to it that you can take as a standalone program or that you can incorporate into your preparation for the competition if you are indeed thinking of participating or have already registered for it. Before I sort of get into the throes of sharing some of this information, let me just say again that if you have any questions or thoughts, please do feel free to drop them into the chat or to use the raise hand feature so that we can all hear you and interact with you today. So in terms of a brief agenda that we have lined up, I'm going to be taking some time to explain what Empower Your Pitch is. I know that many of you have received email communications about it, have some sense of it from what we've shared already, but I'd really like to help folks understand what distinguishes this particular program as what we would like to think of as an innovative opportunity to develop your research communication skills along a variety of lines and help to make your research accessible to a broad audience. To also review a few reasons as to why you might consider participating in the Empower Your Pitch opportunity. We know we have a range of very busy graduate students on the call with us today. So why is this particular program worth your while? To also review in detail how the competition works and to go over the timeline. So there's lots of clarity around that alongside the competition modality, because we have received questions about how we'll be proceeding in person or virtual. To also briefly review an evaluation rubric that you can use if you decide to participate to help frame an effective pitch for this program. And to also review some of the details surrounding a research communication training series that will also be rolling out this spring alongside of the competition itself. So in terms of getting started here, what is Empower Your Pitch? So the first thing to note just briefly is that Empower Your Pitch is actually a modified version of the 3-minute thesis competition. And I'm actually wondering if folks maybe wouldn't mind dropping into the chat, sharing whether or not they're familiar with the 3-minute thesis, sometimes known in an abbreviated form as the 3MT. This is a research communication series that is quite popular at many universities around the world and has also been held at Johns Hopkins for about 5 years or so. And this year, rather than moving forward with the 3MT, we are proceeding with Empower Your Pitch instead. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit of information about what's new about this particular kind of program, alongside of helping everybody to understand what it entails. So Empower Your Pitch, in a word, is a competition that's designed to develop the research communication skills of presenters who are at the doctoral level. So all doctoral students from across Hopkins are eligible to participate at any stage of your program and across all disciplines and fields. And the idea is that you pitch your research in a way that captures the attention of your audience, who will be a non-specialist audience, so folks who are not immersed in the throes of your research in the way that many of your peers and colleagues are within the context of your own cohorts and your programs and departments. So to pitch your research in a way that effectively conveys the essence of what it is that you're working on, that captures the attention of the audience, and that explains its relevance to your listeners. And there might be many ways that you go about this, and this is really what defines Empower Your Pitch and distinguishes it from the 3-minute thesis competition and other approaches to programs like this that have been held at universities globally. With Empower Your Pitch, we're introducing lots of flexibility around how you might approach pitching your research. So you can rely on a traditional spoken word presentation, just like I'm doing here today, accompanied perhaps by a PowerPoint slide or two, and really relying on that format in order to explain your research and its value. At the same time, we're open to students relying on things like putting their thesis research to music, or putting it to poetry or verse, or perhaps wrapping their dissertation or thesis research, incorporating electronic media, costumes, props, other sorts of presentation aids in order to present your work in as creative and flexible way as you'd like, and in a way that you feel would be compelling to your listeners. Really help them to understand what it is that you're working on and what its broader significance is. And so, as creative as you'd like to be, relying on what's essentially our one rule or guiding framework, which is that your presentation does not exceed 3 minutes. As organizers, my team and I would be happy to work with you to think about different ways that you can go about doing that. Okay. A little bit more information about the competition itself in terms of each facet of the program and also how it compares to the 3MT. Let me just note for starters that I'm aware that I'm sharing a very busy slide with you all. This would not be the kind of slide that we would encourage students to submit for Empower Your Pitch. So please do bear with me as I go through some of this content. I won't be going through it all in totally comprehensive detail, but just want to provide enough information for those of you who are familiar with the 3-minute thesis, given that this was held at Hopkins for quite some time. Now we're moving forward with something different, so you have an understanding of what's new about Empower Your Pitch. But also this is a vehicle through which I'll explain the different elements of the program to give everyone an understanding of what it involves. So first, in terms of the presentation type that's permissible with Empower Your Pitch, our sort of guiding framework here is that the presentation takes place in 3 minutes or less. And that's effectively the only guiding framework that we're offering to students in terms of really a rule that we're asking people to adhere to. Other than that, any approach that you want to take to sharing your research and its value will be totally permissible. A traditional 3MT, in contrast, would ask students to rely strictly on spoken word presentations and to incorporate a PowerPoint slide and to format their research in particular ways. To start by explaining its background and significance, to get into research methods, and then to articulate impact. We believe that there are so many different ways that students can go about presenting their research, that students at different stages of their dissertation research might be more comfortable presenting that work differently. And so we want to create that room for students to have more flexibility around how they actually present their work. So again, there's lots of flexibility there. In terms of how this competition will work, in terms of its overall structure, it will take place via a 3-round competition. This is very different from how the 3-minute thesis works. Whereas the 3MT provides 2 rounds, and after round 1, a series of finalists go on to compete in the second and final round of the competition. with Empower Your Pitch, after the first round of the competition, there will actually be no elimination of participants. Now, one of the things I think that many of us know to be true in terms of our research, in work, and in life is that the first time that you take a crack at something, particularly if it's new or there's some level of risk involved, is that it might not come out perfectly the first time. And so what we ask is that participants, of course, put their best foot forward, and we have no doubt that they will. But after that first round, they will receive feedback from a panel of 6 judges, all of whom are experts in the area of research communication, and will then be asked to integrate that feedback into a second iteration of their pitches. Everybody will then proceed to round 2, hopefully having made some changes based on feedback. And after round 2, 12 finalists will be selected to compete in round 3. Round 3 will introduce our participants to a whole new slate of judges. So just so that this is super, super clear to everybody, for rounds 1 and 2, you'll have a slate of 6 judges, all of whom are experts in research communication, because this competition is all about stretching that particular skill set. You'll receive feedback from them from rounds 1 and 2. For those finalists who are selected to compete in round 3, they will be introduced to a new slate of judges who are truly of diverse composition. These will include folks who are affiliated with Hopkins in various capacities, might range from faculty members, administrators, undergraduates, affiliates all across the board who will observe your presentations, having now been supported by the feedback that you received, and they will select a total of 3 winners, each of whom have the option to receive $1,000 each. So unlike the 3MT competition that actually has a hierarchy of the top 3 winners, so there's first, second, and third place prizes, and the cash values will sometimes vary at different universities. With Empower Your Pitch, we have a top 3, and each individual can receive $1,000. During the final round of the competition, slated for late April, you will also be joined by a virtual audience who might consist of people from all across Johns Hopkins, your own family and friends. It will truly be open to so many different individuals joining us. And members of that audience will also vote for a winner who will receive a $500 prize. So lots of prizes on the table. Just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that, of course. There will be plenty of opportunities for training as individuals think about how to go about putting their pitches together and what are indeed the components of an effective pitch. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And if students are also interested in working with members of the professional development staff, whether at PHutures or the PDCO for one-on-one consultations as they work on their pitches, of course, our teams are available to you in that way as well. I'm just looking over the slide to make sure I haven't mentioned anything else that's important. I will also be taking an opportunity toward the end of this session to share information about an evaluation rubric as well, so that everybody has a sense of some of the criteria that will be going into evaluating these presentations. And then that information will also be shared online shortly so that you can access it anytime. Okay, let me just take a moment here, since I've said quite a lot in the last 5 minutes or so, just to see if anybody has any questions and just to kind of take a pause. Okay, so I'm seeing in the chat that we do have a student asking or just sort of saying, oh, I'm curious as to why the 3MT was discontinued. Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And I think for us, rather than thinking of, this competition as representing a major break with the 3MT. It's rather an evolved form of the 3MT. So it has a lot to do with thinking about the nature of the contestants and wanting particularly to welcome students from diverse disciplines to join in. So one of the things that we were finding, and that professionals from other universities find as well, is that the judging criteria of the 3MT tends to make those students who represent certain kinds of disciplines feel a little bit more comfortable presenting than others. And so in that spirit of celebrating diverse research and creative approaches to it, we've decided to introduce a different format. And secondarily to that, we also wanted to incorporate not only rigor and stakes for those students who are interested in a challenge, but to include more opportunities for training and growth. So hopefully that's helpful in answering that question. Okay, so just to sort of reinforce some of those takeaways that I had mentioned again a moment ago, the idea with Empower Your Pitch is to provide more flexibility to prospective contestants, more opportunities for training, but certainly also equal rigor for those students who are interested in joining and taking part in this opportunity. Okay, a little bit of information here about why you should consider participating. So first of all, having just said this, I'll reiterate just one more time that we do have plenty of cash prizes on the table, and we have increased the prize money that's available from previous years in order to help students understand that we value the time that they're taking to participate in this. And so again, there are these prizes. In addition, everybody who participates guaranteed for rounds 1 and 2 will have an opportunity to receive feedback from judges who are experts in the area of research communication. So you'll be having an opportunity to have your pitch really carefully evaluated by a set of judges who will be able to guide and help you utilizing their expertise as you iterate and move through the competition. In addition, we've also put together a series of training sessions that correspond to the rubric and that really get at the fundamentals of effective research communication. And again, putting a pin in that just for a moment, so I'm going to spend some more time on that in a few minutes. But again, so much of this opportunity is about not only the process of competing in the rounds, as important and exciting as that is, but also having other opportunities for training as well. And Empower Your Pitch also provides a chance for folks to sort of meet and collaborate with other doctoral students who you might not otherwise have an opportunity to interface with at the different training sessions and rounds as you move through the program. So just something to kind of keep in mind as you're thinking about this opportunity. Okay, I won't spend terribly much time on this slide, but I did want to take just a moment to go through the overall timeline of the competition so that it's super clear to folks. In terms of the registration deadline, it is March 24th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, and every time listed on this slide for each competition round will be Eastern Time. I say that in recognition of some of the different time zones that folks are calling from. And I'd also like to note that the competition will be proceeding on a fully virtual basis. So for a while, we were debating whether or not to move some rounds to an in-person format, but have decided based on student requests and feedback that it'll work best this year for us to be totally virtual. So each facet of this competition, from the rounds to the research communication training series, will be held over Zoom. Round 1 will be held live at 5 p.m. Eastern on Zoom on April 6th. Round 2 will be held a little bit over a week later. And so we'll be working with our judges to provide feedback to you within just about 24 to 48 hours. So you can utilize that feedback to iterate on a second version of your pitch in advance of the 14th. Again, that will also be held in the evening, Eastern time, 5 o'clock. And then for those students who are selected as competition finalists, the final round will be held at 2 p.m. On Saturday, April 30th. And whether or not folks do become finalists, we're hoping that everybody will be able to join us either as contestants or as members of the audience. Okay, a little bit of information about the Research Communication Training Series. So again, just to note, you have the option to participate in this series, whether or not you wish to participate as a contestant in the competition. The series does serve as a standalone program. And for those graduate students who participate in all 3 available sessions, you'll be eligible for a certificate of completion. We'll be tracking registrations via Zoom. So if you are interested, please do go ahead and register for these sessions. You can register online now through the Empower Your Pitch website. And I'll have a QR code to the site available on the very last slide of this presentation today. Just a little bit of information about what these different sessions will entail. First, for those of you who are interested in moving into the competition or who have registered, these workshops are very much tailored to the rubric. So if you participate, they will definitely enhance any pitch that you're thinking of putting together. The first one will be held in a week's time on the morning of March 9th, again, Eastern time. And it's really all about turning your research into a compelling message, really thinking about the content of what it is that you'll be saying to your audience. We'll be joined by Dr. Ben Reen, who's a neuroscientist and also a well-known science communicator, personality online. And he'll be talking with students about how to frame their research in a way to make it accessible and compelling, what kinds of analogies you might incorporate to help a non-specialist group understand the nature of your research and to break it down into its fundamentals. And he'll also be adding another component of his talk that's drawn from social media and his own experience with that. So you get not only support with putting together a live pitch, but some information for anybody who's thinking about communicating their research on Twitter, on TikTok, on Instagram, making use of those platforms, thinking about how to identify a platform, identify a niche, and thinking about different strategies to utilize different forms of media and content creation to spread information about the work that you're doing on those platforms. So we'll have kind of a 2-part session there. Then on March 16th, we'll be joined by Scott Hollingsworth, who is both an attorney as well as a teacher trainer at Story District. And Story District is really a very interesting organization that trains lots of different individuals in telling really compelling, effective stories in a way that taps into experiences and stimulates both an emotional response from members of the audience as well as their memory. So he'll be speaking a lot about how to put together an effective narrative of your research in a brief period. And some individuals who have worked with Story District have quite recently gone on to participate in the show True Story with Ed Helms and Randall Park on the Peacock app. So you'll get lots of great training from Scott, who's looking forward to working with students that day. And then,
sorry.
Oh yeah, do we have a question? Okay.
No, sorry, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, okay, no worries, no worries. And then finally, we have a third training series that'll be available at the end of March on Wednesday afternoon on anticipating and managing presentation anxiety with Rufus Jones, who's had a really prolific career as an educator, musician, philanthropist. He's currently a New York University affiliated researcher, and he was a former trader on Wall Street. And, I don't know a single person who maybe hasn't experienced just a little bit of jitters in advance of giving a public presentation. But one of the things that Rufus will be doing is helping participants to understand some of the structural factors that might be going into creating those nerves. So thinking about the social and cultural norms and perhaps the hierarchies that all of us are navigating as members of a university community in light of other identity traits and characteristics that we all carry in the world that we live in. And so drawing from structural research around things like stereotype threat and imposter syndrome, he'll be speaking about different ways to both acknowledge these forces that sometimes operate on us, while also providing interventions, strategies, and tools to sort of manage these forces and to present in a really effective and compelling way in view of them. Okay, so again, everyone can participate in this workshop, whether or not they do proceed to go on to participate in Empower Your Pitch. Okay, I am going to take just a brief pause because I'm seeing a couple of sort of notes come in through the chat. Okay, about how long will the rounds last, someone asks. That's a great question. So right now it sort of depends on the number of registrants that we receive. We're tentatively planning on about 2 hours or so for each of those rounds. Perhaps a little bit more, a little bit less. The final round will have simply our slate of 12 finalists who will be competing. So that particular round might be about 1 hour and 15 minutes or so in length. And then we also have just another question about whether these sessions will be recorded. Yeah, great question. And the answer is yes. Yes, we will be making all of this content available asynchronously, and we'll be posting that both on the Empower Your Pitch website and also the Futures YouTube channel. So you'll be able to find the resources on both of those platforms. Okay, wonderful. So as we reach the sort of concluding phase of some of the information that I wanted to share with you all, last but certainly not least, I wanted to help folks understand the nature of the evaluation criteria that judges will be utilizing in order to assess their presentations. Please note that what I have shared here is really more of a bird's eye view of a full-length rubric that we're finalizing now and will make available on the website for folks to access so that they can use it as part of their pitch development process. One of the things that we've done with Empower Your Pitch, and again, this distinguishes this particular opportunity from, say, its predecessor, the 3-minute thesis, or other types of competitions that are out there, is to really break down the components of effective communication into their most fundamental aspects. And our goal here is to transcend what might be differences in communication style, right? So how do we develop rubric criteria that permits the judges to use the very same criteria to assess a presentation that might incorporate music or poetry with one that relies on the traditional spoken word? So you'll see that what the criteria does is prize the effective use of speech or words. It also places a lot of emphasis on how a presentation is structured, and also the relationship between what the pitch is in fact saying, its content, and the research that it draws from. So each bullet point, again, will be completely built out in a rubric that will be shared online. But just to get into some of this in a little bit more detail, so it's really clear for folks, each subsection of the 3 criteria that I've named here will be weighed by the judges on a 1 to 3 scale from most to least effective. So a really, a pitch that the judges deem to be super excellent will receive 3s across the board for a total of 9 points for each section, for a total of 27 points that a presenter can possibly gain. And then there will also be 0.5 intervals permitted. So again, not to split hairs here, but it's really important for us to be kind of granular about this so that we're super fair for people. And so we'll be asking the judges to assess whether or not the use of words was persuasive to them, right? Do they come away from the pitch feeling like they were convinced of the point that folks are trying to make with their research? And that point, I should say, could really vary. It might take the form of a traditional research argument or to argue for the impact of one's research on a broader audience. For those graduate students who are maybe at an earlier phase of their research development, right now you might be in the throes of saying, you know, researchers thus far have pointed to questions A, B, and C as the most essential questions in this field. But actually, I really think that they should be asking a whole other set of questions instead, right? Or one sort of new fundamental research question. So however you want to pose the sort of, you know, the thrust of your presentation, the point that you're making, you can do that, right? But the judges will be looking at whether or not they're persuaded by whatever it is that you might be saying about your work. And of course, given that this is a pitch, they'll be looking to see that your use of language is precise and concise. Do you avoid academic jargon, which is sometimes very difficult to do for those of us who've been working on our projects for so long? Also, they'll be looking to see in terms of structure that pitches were clearly organized and logical. Is the structure of the pitch relevant to the audience at hand? Which is to say that if one knows that their audience, particularly in the final round, right? So you really want to work backwards from this notion of a non-specialist audience. If you know that they're not as familiar with the language of specialization that you use in your field, how much time then does one spend on articulating their methods at great length, right? Some of the calculations they might be working on, how they approach data gathering and analysis, maybe a little bit more time on analogies, metaphors, images, scenarios, things like that to help folks understand, right? And again, not to belabor the point here too much, so I'll just very briefly go to research to, of course, note that given that this is a research communication competition, that the judges will also be looking to see that the pitches, of course, explain the core idea of the research that's represented, that the value of the research, again, at any stage and in any way that it is valuable, is persuasively articulated, and also that some research-based examples are incorporated as well. And I do see another comment here in the chat. So let me just take a moment to field that. What would a research example look like? Yeah, that's a great question. There are so many different ways that you would be able to incorporate examples into your presentation. It might be something like, I actually just watched a presentation yesterday by somebody who is in political science, and they had drawn from an archive of newspapers within a 10-year period in order to provide examples of what the media were saying about the project that they were arguing. And so they drew from each newspaper article to say, journalist number 1 said X, journalist number 2 said Y, journalist number 3 said Z, and all together they collectively point to blank, and then that person went on to explain their argument. So you're able to see a little bit of that research process through specific examples that were incorporated. Is that helpful? I'm sort of thinking on the fly here about different ways to go about this. And of course, it varies so much by discipline. I'll just say that. Okay, great. Glad to see that was helpful. Thank you. And again, so many different ways to go about it. Okay. So with that then in mind, that was the last major piece of the competition that I wanted to share. So I'd love to utilize the remainder of the time that we have to field any additional questions that students have. And of course, we also have a QR code here for anybody who's interested in learning more or registering to go ahead and visit the website. Space may be limited for this competition as we think about the number of participants who register and also some logistical constraints. So even though the deadline is not until March 24th, we do encourage you to register as soon as possible to make sure that you have a slot that's secured for yourself. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing. Okay. And I'd love to take any additional questions that anybody might have in mind. And of course, if things look okay to people, I'm also happy to give you back some of your time today. But again, just wanted to create that space for any additional questions. And thank you, Doug, as well, for providing another possible way of thinking about incorporating examples into a presentation. Yeah, in terms of data points or questions, right, that sort of spurred the particular project that folks are working on. Yeah, that's excellent. Okay, somebody asks here, do we have some examples to look up to that meet all of the criterion? That's such a great question. You know what? Let us take a little bit of time to look into that. And we can think about putting together a repository of resources, which we already sort of have in mind to do on the website. And perhaps we can identify a few different presentations that sort of really are outstanding examples that folks can then rely on as potential tools in their toolkit as they think about putting their presentations together. We'll see what we can do here. We have so much diversity of presentation that's permissible, but we'll see about a variety of different examples that we can provide to folks. Thank you for that. Okay, any other questions or thoughts before we wrap up for the day? Okay. Okay, so it seems like people are good to go. I'm going to go ahead and drop my email address into the chat. Please do feel free to reach out anytime if other questions do come up. Be very happy to address them. Thank you all so much again for your interest in the competition and in the training series. Very much hope to see you at both programs. And again, please do be in touch. And with that, I'm happy to sort of wrap up for the day. Hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much.